I need to switch gears a little bit and go to Jennifer wrote in right at the start of the show. And she said, my son is 14 and has autism. He has an attitude to everything and still throws fists. What should I do? Now, somebody else asked her to clarify, um, is he saying fits or fists? And she wrote it and said like he is 2 or 3. So I don't know whether it's fists or fits like 2 or 3, but I think probably fits like a 2 or 3-year-old, like a tantrum. And so that's stressful, especially when our kids get bigger and overtake us. And they, my grandmother used to have a phrase about, that's when they can plant you in the ground like a post. And, unfortunately, I think for a lot of families, what I hear from a lot of caregivers is that as they get bigger, the fear of, oh no, what if, and I can think of one very good friend that her son in one of his fits knocked her out, cold cocked her, knocked her out. And the crying that happened afterwards from both of them, because she knew that that was a moment that they couldn't come back from. And even though her child is pretty impacted, she said, I know he knew it too. I'm just going to say that the good that came from that was that mom got the help she needed. And thank goodness that that's the end of that story. But Evelyn, for this person that the child was 14 and that everything is an attitude, and then I'm hoping they're going to tell us fits or fists, but they're saying they're 2 or 3.
Yeah, I just need so much more information to really give good advice. But like, I'm going to assume that if you're throwing an attitude, that this child is verbal.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to assume that it's a verbal child and just is fighting everything and then has meltdowns like a 2 or 3-year-old. And I'll come from that point of view. There's a new type of kid across the board, and they're not new because I've seen them for, my oldest one is probably in his mid-20s now, but they're new with the new diagnostic criteria to a lot of other people. And those are the ones where I say it's a touch of autism, where they're very vocal and school might even be good, but for the most part, but abstract and nonverbal cues, anything that is not extremely concrete is very difficult to understand. They want the world to work in a black and white way. And you and me, if our whole world wasn't defined for us and we didn't understand, we would be having those fits too. I would be so angry and mad at everywhere I went because now you're changing this, and it might seem obvious because now I'm telling you that you can yell, but the reason you can yell is because that it was okay for that person to yell at you was because you were at an outdoor stadium and it was really loud. So now, dad is yelling really loud to make sure you hear, what the instruction is. And the kid has interpreted the yelling as, they did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And just that miscommunication would just send you into, you'd get tired of it, because that
Yeah.
means that every moment of your day things aren't making sense. You have no control of what's happening. You learn a rule and you think this is the rule, but then suddenly it's changed, because in reality, in social settings, social interaction, all rules change and there are exceptions for everything.
Yeah.
Pretty much, there's always an exception. For my kids who are really rule governed, the ones that want those rules, I always tell them the ultimate rule is things change.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, because as you gain information, it changes the context and the decision making you're making. And so many of our teens just do not understand it. Everything is coming at them as a sudden surprise of like some change that happened. And a lot of our teens who are like this don't read nonverbal cues, meaning they don't read facial expressions. They don't read gestures of people. They're not receiving the warnings that are coming. The example I always use is if you're in a classroom and the teacher keeps looking at her watch or looking at the clock, all those kids in there that can read that and infer that something's going to happen, they've been warned. But our kid that sees that as just the teacher looking at her watch, but doesn't infer something's going to happen. So when that fire drill happens, or when somebody comes bursting in the room, or when there's a change in schedule, our kid is the only one that's not warned.
Yeah.
They
It's left
don't,
field for them.
it came out of left field. So they start to try to control their world by putting rules out there, making demands that seem too, off the wall or too strict or limited. And they're just trying to protect themselves because they're not getting the communication they need, to be able to function in this world. And I love these kids so much because facts work for them, and they've worked for them in crazy ways. We just had one recently where the child was actually having bowel movement issues, constipation, and he's a fact-oriented kid. So I said, hey, do this. Get a book and just do the facts. If you eat fiber, these are the foods that have fiber. And if you drink enough water, and if you get enough exercise, and this is what exercise means, when you go to the bathroom, it won't hurt anymore. If you start. The next day he did it, and that was the end.
Right.
Like literally, like that just going by the facts, having someone tell him for years that this is what he should do, and he should eat better, but it was also vague about what does eat better mean,
Yeah.
or drink more water, like why should I drink more water? But like we literally did the biological aspect of it.
Wow.
Or we had a kid who was 4 and started to fascination with death, and a lot of our kids have this fascination with death because they get a lot of attention from it too. But the dad was a doctor, and I just said, can you sit with him and just explain to him how his body works with his heart and his brain and everything? Dad went through it, took out his medical books, and dad thought I was crazy, and the kid was like, oh, okay. And then all fascination of death was gone.
There you
like
go.
like it's just like they want the black and white that they know. All the social information is so abstract and so hard to understand. And when is good because yesterday this was good but today it's bad, or
Yeah.
yes, if your life is only a coin where you're either a success because you're perfect or you're a failure, you're going to hit failure much more than your success because there's no one that's perfect.
Right.
And I'm always telling these kids, no matter how hard you try, you're not going to be perfect. So we need another definition,
Yeah.
for how things go. And they need to learn all the gray in between, because life is really a continuum of moving back and forth and feeling good when you get, when you have contact with good things, reinforcers, and see how it's positive in your life and see yourself moving and getting better. And then, and we feel good about ourselves when we get better at something. We'll never be perfect, and there are people who are perfectionists, and they're always, it's like self-torture to be a perfectionist. But but they know that is not reality. But if our kids, if that's the only definition they have, they're either failing or they're successful. And life is really hard because nobody's perfect, so they're failing the majority of the time.
Wow.
And it's just the emotions that come from it. If we all thought that's what was happening to us, we would all be depressed and sad and not be really upset too. And so many of these kids, that's how they view the world and how they view what they're doing. And they want all these rules to stay intact, but we're giving them 1,000 exceptions every time something changes. And I've had kids tell me, like, but I really want to be perfect. And I'm like, no matter how much you want it, it's not going to happen. I'm going to tell you right now.
Yeah.
So there's just a lot. And we have a lot of these kids who are very vocal, and they're vocal, but they don't have a lot of words. And
Yeah.
it takes somebody really to realize you don't have the words you need to describe all your things in between, or you have the wrong definition for those words. You're saying okay, but what you mean by okay is that it's perfect.
It's funny when you were describing, imagine if you were in this circumstance where you didn't have the context and you didn't understand. In one place, the rule is this, and then 2 days later, the rule is this, and you're like, wait a second, I don't know, and how that would feel, how out of control it would feel. I think we can all relate to that, because isn't that exactly how we have all felt in COVID? It's like the rule gets told that it's this, and then 2 days later, the rule is different. And we're like, somebody just explain it to me and tell me what the rules are and give me a well-defined thing. And being told we don't know, and we're giving you the information as it comes, has been frustrating for all of us. So I think we can relate to that and think about how frustrated we have been. I've heard all these stories of people who, in fact, we just had a psychiatrist on the other day who was talking about that there is this fallout from COVID, that we're all less patient, that we're all more likely to fly off the handle, that, you know, people who have not been confrontational or violent have felt like, who am I? I want to punch this person, right? So if we can all relate to that, that this, you know, 14-year-old is struggling because he can't find ground, how can we help this mom so that she can help her child, and that we don't get to the point where he's throwing fits like a 2-year-old? What can we put in mom's backpack to help her, Evelyn?
Well, I think like I don't take for granted where your kid is. Like a good neuropsych assessment is wonderful because it tells you how much language do they understand, how much social, like just you get a baseline. And then you
So
get
who
like
do you go to for that, Evelyn? Who's the person?
uh depending on the age, it could be a developmental pediatrician, developmental psychologist. It can be a pediatric neurologist. Like it's you know, your MD should be able to direct you to get that.
Okay.
But really comprehensive. Schools don't do a thorough neuropsych eval. They do what's within the academic setting, and school psychologists are only trained really for that academic portion. So that might help the reporting, but it's usually not comprehensive enough. And so I think if you can get that going, figure out how much your child actually understands across, you know, many different levels, then bring a BCBA in and start doing what we call a functional behavior assessment.
Okay.
What are all the times that he tantrums? What happened before? What did we do after? And you can tell your little fold of your ABCs, Shannon.
Okay.
But just
I
going
got
through and figuring out like, why is he having this tantrum? And then you can create a behavior intervention plan for it. And you want someone who's able to observe your child in different settings when these things occur. They really do need to know, um, you know, because, and there's environmental variables that you may not be aware of, but as someone coming from the outside looking in, they might be able to see. And really, like now that we are out and about more, just, you know, whether it's masked, you know, whatever form, but being able to see where your child is functioning on a normal day to day with normal demands, and being able to identify what are those antecedents, you know, what are, you know, consequences, what are the replacement skills that he needs, you know, to communicate what he needs so that he doesn't have to throw himself into a tizzy, you know, when something goes wrong or doesn't go his way, you know, or just to get attention. You know, we don't know. And if you bring a good behavior analyst in who's really, and you know, able to observe and see your child in all these different settings and all these different places, you know, they'll be able to figure out a replacement plan and be able to teach you how to use the right behavioral techniques, you know, to mitigate it so that hopefully we can minimize, you know, all these problem behaviors. It really is just a city, you know, it's the power of observation.
There we go. Well, and there were some words that Evelyn used in there that I want to make sure that everybody understands. A BCBA is a board certified behavior analyst. They're an expert in ABA, applied behavior analysis. You want to make sure that you're with one who also is an expert in autism, because you can be a BCBA and not work in the field of autism. Just want to be clear about that because people don't often know that. So they have to be a BCBA and they have to have expertise in the field of autism. But Evelyn said I could get out my little paper. And so that's why I started doing my little origami project. So I have, you know, everybody can find access to a piece of notebook paper. And what I do is I fold it into 3. That's my origami project. And I write across the top. I don't know if you can see. It's easy to remember: A, B, C. That's whiting out, but there's the C. So A is the fancy word that Ev used, was antecedent. It's not our jargon today, but let's make it the jargon for the day. It just means what happened before. What happened before? The B stands for the behavior and the C stands for the consequence. And for those of us who do not have advanced degrees in psychology and aren't familiar with ABA, this is like the first step. We can all do this. So, you know, your kiddo throws a fit. We're learning the ABCs of behavior, and it happens in the ABC order, but we often don't experience it that way until we come to think of it a different way. So we start with the behavior. Your kiddo throws a fit. And when they're throwing the fit, you need to be thinking about this piece of paper and be watching it, making sure you're safe, your child is safe, and that property is safe, right? But in your head, you're thinking later on, I'm going to have to write down exactly what this behavior was. Like, did he start out whining and then he punched the pillow and then he kicked the furniture and then he spit on the coffee table and then he twirled around 4 times and he laid down on the floor and he kicked his arms and legs? Like, you just need to be like being a court reporter in your head and be watching the behavior so that you can write it all down, because this is going to be helpful to your BCBA later on. So first thing you do is you're thinking about what is the behavior so that you can write it down later on. And the first chance you get, when everything is done and everything is over, you're going to write down what the behavior was in the B column. Then you're going to think about what happened as a result of the behavior. And often you're not going to have thought about that, but your child spit on the coffee table, threw himself on the floor, kicked their arms and their legs. And when it was over, did you give them lemonade and cookies, which is what I have done before? Like, don't judge yourself. I have done that before, but just write it down. No judgment. What was the consequence for the behavior? But then you have to be a detective and think, okay, now that I've written that down, I got to go back in time and with the best recollection I have, what happened right beforehand? And write down the time. Like, did I say to him, hey, later we're going to grandma's? Did I say to him, you need to brush your teeth? Like, what happened? No judgment again. What happened directly before? And sometimes it's that I just fed my child a piece of chocolate cake, or we just had a treat, or we just were talking to this person and we had to leave, whatever it is. And that's the whole event. And just keep a diary this way. You will start to see things, you will start to see trends. But really, the gift of this is that then you hand this to your BCBA expert and you go, well, here's what's going on. They will think that you are amazing, right? Won't they?
Yes.
They're like, whoo, this helps me so much. This is the fast track to finding the answer. But they will do the detective work. But often as a parent, you go, well, that's interesting. It keeps happening at 2:11. Just like I just said, my internet keeps leaving at the same time. That's not a coincidence. Something's going on, right? Then you can go look for what is the thing going on. But then they start to figure out why the behavior is happening, and then they already have the answer of how to fix the behavior. It's just as if they have to know what the behavior is doing, and then they can fit the right answer to it. This is like the keys to the kingdom. They have a name for what they call that, the 3-term contingency. We don't care. We like, that's, you're not going to say, oh, the 3-term contingency in the grocery store when you're talking to your friend Betty. But if you care, that's what they call it. But the little sheet, and you can do this on your phone. It doesn't have to be in 3 columns. You just remember the ABCs: behavior, consequence. The A stands for what happened before. But if you can, when he starts throwing these fits, if you can do one of these for what, a week, Evelyn?
Yeah. I mean, if you know when these fits tend to happen, so you just have to choose a time period that is encompassing over multiple days, multiple situations. And what could happen is, in one situation he's doing it for one reason, but in another situation he's doing it for a different reason. And that's where your BCBA will be able to look at the content of what you've written down and to be able to decide, like, oh, he has a fit here because he didn't get what he wanted, but he has a fit here because he needs to leave. He wants to escape the situation, avoid what's going on as much as possible. And so then there's 2 different behavior plans, because what we call it is, it's a different function. There's a different reason for why he's having this fit. It's just the same fit works for all these reasons.
Yes. Yeah.
Or I can have a fit and suddenly mom comes running to me.
Yeah.
It's like amazing.
I got
I can just do
paycheck.
one thing and all these things happen.
Yes. And in fact, if you don't treat this kind of behavior, that is exactly what happens, that they start using that for every single thing that they need in their lives. And your life, you can feel the toilet flushing in the background of your life because everything is upended and your child is throwing a fit for everything. And your quality of life is gone.
Yes.
And their quality of life is not good, because if you have, it takes a lot of energy. I've thrown a tantrum or 2 in my life, including in my adulthood. It takes a lot of energy to throw a tantrum to get your needs met. And what we find across the board is when you give these individuals a better way to get their needs met, they won't waste the energy to throw a tantrum.
Oh yeah, I love when they're vocal enough where it's like, doesn't it take a lot of work to cry like that? And they're like, yes. And I said, isn't it easier just to say blank? And they're like, yes. And I said, so what are you going to do next time? And they look at me like, okay, I should just say that. And I'm like, well, you made the choice.
Yeah.
You know, but it's so funny because sometimes it's a light bulb for them too. They look at me like, oh yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, and it is. It is.